Could I play for food? Like a sharp blade, the 12-year-old girl's timid voice sliced through the sophisticated talks in the Continental Hotel lobby. Conversation ceased as everyone turned to look at the young black girl who had the audacity to interrupt the most prestigious charity cocktail party in the city. Standing at the main hall entrance, Amelia Washington's big, eager eyes were focused on the Steinway grand piano shining under the crystal chandeliers. The precise suits and beautiful outfits surrounding her stood in sharp contrast to her plain, slightly loose attire. She held a battered rucksack close to her chest like a shield. A woman with platinum hair murmured, "How did that kid get in here?" while gripping her glass of champagne. "Where's security?" The event was a gala to raise funds for underprivileged youth. An irony that did not escape Amelia, who had spent the last week sleeping in different shelters. She had heard about the event when she passed by the hotel entrance earlier, and something inside her compelled her to try to get in. Victoria Sterling, the event organizer and heir to a family fortune, approached with measured steps. At 45, she epitomized the city's social elite, educated, refined and utterly confined. A McDonald's is located 2 blocks away. "All I wanted to do was play," Amelia repeated, her voice gaining unexpected firmness. "Just one song in exchange for a plate of food." Laughter began to ripple through the crowd. "She thinks she can play the piano," scoffed a man in a navy blue suit. "She probably doesn't even know which key is C. It's cute how imaginative these kids are," added another woman, shaking her head with feigned pity. "They watch a movie and think they can do anything." But Amelia didn't look down. There was something in his posture, a quiet dignity, a silent confidence that seemed out of place in a child of his situation, as if she knew something that everyone else there was completely unaware of. Dr. Robert Chen, a renowned pianist and one of the judges of national competitions, watched the scene from the back of the hall. He had noticed how the girl's eyes fixed on the piano with a reverence he rarely saw, even in advanced students. There was recognition there, familiarity. "Victoria," Dr. Chin approached. "Maybe we should let her play. After all, we're here to help. Talented young people, aren't we?" Victoria laughed, a crystalline cruel sound. "Robert, please look at her. Children like this don't have access to music education. It's impossible." What none of them knew was that Amelia had grown up for the first 8 years of her life in a home where music was as essential as breathing. Her grandmother, a classical pianist who never achieved the recognition she deserved because of the color of her skin, had been her first and only teacher. When her grandmother died and Amelia ended up in the foster care system, she carried with her not only the pain of loss, but a talent that even she did not fully understand. While everyone looked at her with disdain, Amelia stood firm as someone who had weathered much worse storms and learned to find strength in her own vulnerability. His fingers moved unconsciously as if playing an invisible melody, a habit he had developed to calm himself in the most difficult moments. If you are enjoying this story of overcoming adversity and justice, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple, innocent question was about to silence a room full of prejudice and reveal a talent that would redefine everything those people thought they knew about human potential. Victoria Sterling crossed her arms and laughed theatrically, as if she had heard the most absurd joke in the world. "Very well, dear," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Since you insist so much, let's make a little deal. You can play, but with a few conditions." The crowd drew closer, sensing the smell of a cruel spectacle about to unfold. Victoria loved being the center of attention, especially when she could demonstrate her moral superiority in front of other members of high society. "First condition," Victoria announced, raising a perfectly manicured finger. "You will play only one song and we will choose which one. Second condition, if he manages to play decently, I will personally pay for a full dinner. But," she paused dramatically, "when he fails miserably, as we know he will leave here immediately and never bother respectable people again." "How cruel," whispered an older woman at the back of the group. But her voice was drowned out by the approving laughter of the other guests. Amelia remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the piano. Something was happening in her mind. memories mingling with the present. She could almost hear his grandmother, Betty's soft voice. "When people try to belittle you, let the music speak for you, my dear. Music doesn't lie, and it knows no prejudice." "I accept," Amelia said simply, her voice clear and firm. Dr. Chin watched, fascinated. There was something about the girl's posture, the way she looked at the instrument, that intrigued him deeply. In 30 years of evaluating pianists, he had developed an instinct for recognizing true talent, and something about this child made his expert senses tingle. "Perfect." Victoria clapped her hands. "Now for the music." She looked around, searching for the most difficult and humiliating option possible. Her eyes settled on James Morrison, a mediocre pianist who played in local bars. "James, dear, what would be a suitable piece for our young artist?" James smiled mischievously. "How about Beethoven's Fur Release? Everyone who has ever sat at a piano at least once in their life tries to play that piece. If she really knows anything, she should be able to do it." The choice drew laughter from the crowd. Furious was considered a beginner's piece among laymen, but to play it perfectly required refined technique and years of practice. It was the perfect trap. If Amelia knew only the basics, he would try to play and fail disastrously. If he knew nothing, he wouldn't even be able to start. "Excellent choice," Victoria applauded. "A song that any child who has ever had a piano lesson knows. There are no excuses for failure." Amelia nodded and walked toward the piano. Each step seemed charged with a quiet determination that made some people at the back of the hall feel inexplicably uncomfortable. There was something wrong with that scene. A 12-year-old child should not carry such dignity in the face of such humiliation. When she sat down on the piano bench, adjusting it to the perfect height with precise, familiar movements, Dr. Chen felt a chill run down her spine. Those were not the movements of a beginner. Victoria mocked the people who were closest to her, saying, "Look at that. She doesn't even know how to sit on the bench properly." It's likely that she has never seen a real piano before, however. Dr. Chen had observed the exact opposite, Amelia's hands hovering over the keys in a perfect classical position. The bench's adjustment, and her upright posture details that took years to perfect his memories poured into her head like a deluge. Her grandmother, her mother, Betty Washington, had been one of the first black pianists to try to enter the city's conservatory in the 1960s. Her talent was undeniable, but the doors remained closed due to the prejudice of the time. Betty channeled her passion by teaching children from the community in her small home, transforming his old upright piano into a portal to the world of classical music. "Music is her universal language," Amelia, Betty used to say as she guided her granddaughters' little fingers over the keys. "When you play from the heart, people listen with their soul, not their eyes." Amelia had spent countless hours at that piano, absorbing not only technique, but the deep musical understanding that only a true master can impart. When Betty died and Amelia was separated from everything she knew, music remained her only constant companion, played on imaginary pianos during lonely nights in shelters. "We are waiting," Victoria said, drumming her impatient fingers. "Or have you given up before even trying?" Amelia inhaled deeply before touching the keys, saying, "It felt like electricity." After months without playing a real instrument, feeling the keys under his fingers was like rediscovering a lost part of her soul. The first note echoed through the hall with a crystal impurity that made several people look up in surprise. It wasn't the hesitant amateurish sound they had expected. It was a note played with the confidence of someone who knows every nuance of the instrument intimately. Dr. Chen approached discreetly, her professional curiosity fully aroused. That first note had been played with impeccable technique, precise attack, perfect sustain, controlled timbre. These were details that only years of serious training could produce. "Coincidence," Victoria murmured, but her voice had lost some of its previous confidence. Amelia began the main melody of Furious, and every note that flowed from her hands was like a small miracle. There was no hesitation, no technical error. The music emerged naturally, as if she and the piano were part of a single organism. But there was something else, an emotional maturity in the interpretation that left Dr. Chen completely stunned. The way she phrased the melodic passages, how she controlled the dynamics, how she allowed the silence between the notes to speak. As much as the music itself, it was the work of a mature artist, not an untrained child. The hall had fallen completely silent. The champagne glasses remained motionless in the guests' hands. The conversation ceased. Even the waiters stopped moving. Everyone was mesmerized by that small figure at the piano, creating music of unexpected and breathtaking beauty. Victoria felt a growing uneasiness in her stomach. This was not going according to plan. The public humiliation she had orchestrated was turning into something completely different, something that was totally beyond his control. As Amelia played, lost in the music that flowed through her like a force of nature, a single question echoed in the minds of everyone present. Who was this girl really? And what secrets was her music about to reveal? As Amelia navigated the most complex passages of Furus, Dr. Chen felt his heart race. 40 years of evaluating musical talent had honed his instincts, and what he was witnessing defied all logic. The girl's technique was not just competent, it was extraordinary. The descending arpeggio passage, which stumped even advanced students, flowed from her fingers like crystal clear water. Each note had weight and purpose. Each pause breathed with mature musicality. Dr. Chen watched in fascination as she controlled the sustained pedal with the precision of a professional concert pianist. "This is impossible," he muttered to himself, moving even closer to the piano. Victoria, sensing the change in the atmosphere, felt the first alarm bells go off in her mind. The conversations had ceased completely. Even the waiters had stopped serving, mesmerized by the music that transformed the hall into an impromptu concert hall. She must have memorized this song from some YouTube video. Victoria said loudly enough for others to hear, desperately trying to regain control of the narrative. His reasoning, however, sounded less and weaker. Kids these days copy anything from the internet. Amelia's actions went beyond mere imitation. It was a straightforward interpretation, full with an emotional comprehension that could only be gained after years of focused study and above-all experience. Throughout her career, she had seen a lot of prodigies, from 5-year-olds playing Mozart to teens learning Rachmaninoff. But she had hardly ever seen someone so young, under such improbable circumstances, possess both flawless technique and musical maturity. Amelia arrived at the composition's climax, when the virtuoso passages are followed by a forceful return of the primary theme. With a comfort that betrayed hundreds, if not thousands, of hours of focused work, her hands moved across the keys. Such intimacy with the instrument could not be reproduced. The song was like a subterranean river of memories. Through the ages, Amelia could still hear his grandmother Betty's voice. "My dear, playing the correct notes isn't the point of music. Telling a story that only you can tell is the goal." More than just a teacher, Betty Washington had become. Seeing the future through her granddaughter's little fingers, she was a visionary. She was born in 1940 and grew up during a period when black pianists were routinely shut out of performance venues and major conservatories. In response, she transformed his own house into a musical shrine where local kids learnt that they, too, were entitled to enjoy classical music. Betty used to add, "The world will try to tell you that certain things aren't for people like us," shifting Amelia's position on the piano bench. However, music has no boundaries, no color, and no poverty. It is truth-aware. Amelia spent 8 fortunate years learning both technique and musical philosophy. She learnt from Betty that every composer has their own language. Chopin talked about desire, Beethoven of adversity and success, Mozart of joy and crystal. She discovered that her musical voice was just as valuable, which was more significant. Amelia lost more than just her grandma when Betty unexpectedly passed away from a heart attack. She also lost her entire universe. She was cut off from the piano, from music, and from everything that made her life meaningful by the foster care system. She played fictitious keyboards in the chilly shelter dorms for 4 years, carrying songs only in her head. Now, however, everything returned in this bizarre time at the Hotel Continental. As though no time had ever passed, Betty's words of encouragement, kind corrections, and lessons all flowed through her hands. As Amelia performed the piece's last coda, Dr. Chen gazed in wonder. She demonstrated a musical comprehension that takes decades to develop by masterfully manipulating the dynamics, beginning pianissimo and rising to a grand forte before descending to the tiny whisper at the opening. He said, "Please tell me you're seeing this too," to his colleague, a professor of piano at the nearby university. "This youngster is a phenomenon in addition to being gifted." Victoria Sterling could feel the earth moving underfoot. Her well-planned scheme to degrade a helpless child was becoming the complete reverse of what she had intended. Instead of confirming her prejudices, Amelia was forcing everyone to question their most basic assumptions about class, race, and merit. "It has to be a trick," Victoria said to her closest companions. "Nobody suddenly learns to play the piano like that. Somewhere she must have had private lessons, and they must have been pricey." However, Victoria was aware that her comments sounded more and more frantic as she spoke. The child in front of her was exhibiting a level of excellence that was beyond the reach of money. She had a profundity that came from areas that luxury could never access, and she was playing with soul and lived history. Several audience members held their breath as Amelia delicately played the last notes of Furies, as if afraid to break the enchanted bond between herself and the instrument. She held her hands hovering over the keys for a time after the final echo died in the hall's utter silence. She then gently turned to face the quiet crowd from the bench. The timid child who had pleaded for food was vanished. A young artist who had recently asserted his position in the world through the universal language of music took his place. With a respectful applause that reverberated through the assembly like distant thunder, Dr. Chen was the first to break the hush. One by one, others joined, until the Continental Hotel hummed with real praise. With increasing anxiety, Victoria glanced around. Her public humiliation effort had become a celebration of the ability she had attempted to hide. Even worse, a question that plagued her was seen in the other guests' eyes. What else were they mistaken about if they were so mistaken about this child? Sitting quietly, Amelia let the cheers fall on her like rain after a long dry spell. But something was taking shape behind her eyes. Not conceit, but an increasing awareness of her own strength. This was just the beginning, but she had made her point. Dr. Chen walked over to the piano with a look of professional interest mixed with appreciation. "Child," he muttered, "could you tell me where you studied? He must have a remarkable teacher." For a brief time, Amelia let all of the agony from the last 4 years shine through her eyes as she met his. "My grandmother taught me," was her straightforward response. "Music is the one thing that no one can take away from me," she remarked. Dr. Chen received the answer like a bolt of lightning. A grandma is not a costly conservatory. Family love is not a privilege that can be bought. Talent developed at home rather than in prestigious schools. A 12-year-old who had recently revised her standards of grandeur was challenging everything he held to be true about the process of creating musical brilliance. Amelia realized she had gone too far. Even as the hall continued to resound with grudging appreciation, she was unable to continue acting like a hungry lost child. Too much had been shown and promised by her music. She now had to choose how far she was willing to go with that realization, and whether she was prepared to show these privileged people what a worthless child could truly do when music spoke through her soul with the force of generations of unfulfilled dreams, all eyes on her, and expectations hanging in the air like thick perfume. "Young lady," he remarked, her voice quivering a little. Dr. Chen approached the piano with careful steps, as if approaching something sacred. "I need to ask you a very important question. What is your full name?" "I'm Amelia Washington," she said, sounding as composed as she had been all evening. Dr. Chen felt the name hit him like a lightning strike. He stepped back as his eyes grew wide. "Washington, Washington. Betty, are you the granddaughter of Betty Washington?" Dr. Chun put his hands over his face as Amelia gave a mute nod. "My God," he whispered to me. Betty Washington was one of the greatest pianists this country has ever produced. She should have played at the best conservatories in the world, but her voice faltered, laden with ancient pain. Victoria watched the exchange with growing unease. "Robert, what are you talking about? Who is Betty Washington?" Dr. Chin turned to her with an expression that mixed disbelief and disgust. Victoria Betty Washington was a legend in the music community. A virtuoso who was systematically excluded from conservatories and concert halls because of her color, she became one of the most respected private teachers in the country, training dozens of professional musicians. The crowd murmured, some recognizing the name from their own musical experiences. Betty Washington was whispered about in musical circles as a teacher who could transform any dedicated student into an exceptional artist. But that was decades ago, Victoria said, her voice sounding increasingly defensive. And even if that story is true, it doesn't change the fact that she's a homeless person begging for money at a private event. It was then that Amelia rose from the piano bench. For the first time that evening, she allowed her true personality to emerge completely. A number of people in the room involuntarily recoiled as the subservient posture vanished and was replaced by an unwavering dignity. "Miss Sterling," Amelia stated in a loud and clear voice. She stopped to allow the silence to sink in before saying, "You are correct about one thing. He shouldn't be here tonight." The crowd grew still as the speaker said, "I should be at Carnegie Hall in New York, where I have a recital scheduled for next week." Victoria felt the floor move beneath his feet. "My name is Amelia Washington," she said, "and I am the youngest classical pianist ever accepted into the Juilliard School's Young Artists program. I am also the current national champion of classical piano for under 15s. She paused again, allowing the information to sink in. "The reason I am here tonight is not because I need food or money." Dr. Chen watched, fascinated, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place in his mind. "The documentary," he murmured. "You're making the documentary?" Amelia nodded. "Exactly. I'm collaborating with PBS on a documentary about prejudice and access to the arts. My producer suggested that I attend charity events for arts education disguised as a young person without resources to document how privileged people really treat those they consider inferior." The revelation fell on the room like a bomb. Victoria felt all the blood drain from his face. You're filming us?" "Hidden cameras," Amelia confirmed calmly. "High definition, audio and video. Everything that happened here tonight has been documented for national broadcast." Victoria looked around desperately, searching for cameras for any sign that this was a cruel prank. "That's illegal. You can't film us without consent." "Actually," Dr. Chen interjected, his voice laden with dark satisfaction, "you signed image releases. When you came in, it's written quite clearly on the ticket that this event could be filmed for documentary purposes." He smiled wryly. "I'm sure no one read the fine print." The crowd began to stir, people whispering frantically to each other, some already reaching for his phone to check his ticket. The panic was palpable. "The first part of the documentary," Amelia continued, ignoring the growing chaos, "will focus on how talent and potential are overlooked when they come packaged in appearances that defy privileged expectations. The second part will demonstrate how those who call themselves defenders of the arts respond. When confronted with real art from unexpected sources, Dr. Chen approached Amelia with a great deal of respect and asked, "May I ask, what do you intend to do with this recording? The documentary will air nationally next month, but I've also created a YouTube channel where I post shorter versions of these social experiments. My latest video, filmed at a similar event in Boston, currently has 2.5 million views, especially when it comes from people who pretend to be virtuous while practicing the very prejudices they claim to fight." The audience watched in horror as Victoria faced the truth, and in a matter of days, her cruelty would be seen by millions of people, and his name would be forever linked to the kind of prejudice and elitism she had so blatantly displayed. You have spent the entire evening telling me that people like me don't deserve to be in places like this, Amelia stated. Speaking directly to the event planner, Sterling, that we are not worthy, talented, or entitled to engage in great culture. Her voice gained a strength that silenced the entire hall. Tomorrow, the whole world will see exactly the kind of person you really are. Victoria tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. The magnitude of her impending public humiliation was simply too great to process. Dr. Chen looked around the room, seeing the panic on the faces of the other guests. How many other events have you filmed? This is the 12th, Amelia replied, and it's always the same. People who claim to value art and education, but who immediately judge and dismiss talent based solely on appearances. She turned to face Victoria. One last time, the difference between you and her, Mrs. Sterling, is that when I was actually homeless for a few months after my grandmother's death, I learned that dignity doesn't come from money or status. It comes from how we treat other human beings when we think no one is watching. The silence in the hall was deafening. Every person present knew that his words and actions that night would be judged by millions of strangers, and most knew that there was no possible defense for what he had demonstrated. As Amelia discreetly collected a small recording device hidden in her backpack, one question hung in a heavy air of the Continental Hotel. How many other privileged and prejudiced people had discovered too late that the young woman they had despised had the power to reveal her true nature to the whole world? 6 months later, Victoria Sterling watched from the window of his small apartment as the limousine pulled up in front of Carnegie Hall. Amelia Washington, now wearing an elegant concert gown, waved to fans before entering the theater where she would make her debut as the youngest soloist of the season. The documentary Faces of Discrimination had gone viral, racking up over 15 million views on YouTube alone. Victoria had become the national symbol of elitist hypocrisy, losing not only her position in all charitable organizations, but also the respect of a high society she valued so much. Former charity event organizer, exposed as prejudiced in viral documentary read the headlines in local newspapers for weeks. Her luxury events company lost all its important clients, and he now worked as an assistant at a small law firm, trying to rebuild a reputation that might never fully recover. Meanwhile, Dr. Chen had become Amelia's official mentor, helping her navigate the world of professional classical music. The Continental Hotel, embarrassed by the public exposure, created a scholarship program for underprivileged young musicians, naming Amelia as its official ambassador. Music knows no color, social class, or zip codes, Amelia said in her first national interview after the incident. She only knows truth and passion, and when you have both, no barrier can stop you. The impact of the documentary transcended entertainment. Music schools across the country started community outreach programs. Conservatories revised as admissions processes, and hundreds of talented young people from underprivileged communities were given opportunities that had previously been denied to them. Victoria, watching Amelia triumph where she herself had tried to humiliate her, finally understood the most painful lesson of her life. Dignity and talent cannot be bought with money, inherited with surnames, and definitely not measured by the color of one's skin or the address where one comes from. Amelia's best revenge was not to destroy Victoria. It was to prove that true greatness transcends prejudice, and that sometimes those we least expect carry the most extraordinary gifts. If this story of overcoming adversity touched his heart, subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories that show how true excellence always finds its way, regardless of the obstacles that try to block it.